It's a bird. It's a plane. Nah, it's just some dude in red underwear who wants to talk about the new Superman movie. So here it goes. So when it comes to this new James Gunn Superman movie, it was easily one of my most anticipated movies of the summer season. And the other day, when I went to see an early screening of Superman, walking into the auditorium, there was probably 150 people wearing the same Superman shirt. So the fandom is alive and well, but the biggest question is, does the movie live up to the expectations? So what's this movie all about? Directed by James Gunn, Superman reintroduces the character to a new generation. Here, Superman must reconcile his alien Kryptonian legacy with a very human upbringing as Clark Kent, but in a world that views those values as outdated. When it comes to this new Superman movie, there's a lot riding on this film. It is essentially the launching pad of James Gunn's DCU, and this movie tries to do a lot, and sometimes I think it tries to do too much. First, I want to talk about what worked for me in this movie. So when it comes to this movie, the first thing I have to say is, it just dives into the action. You see some text up on the screen, Superman has already been Superman for a couple of years, and you get right into the action. There's no origin story, though I will say throughout the film, they do have some dialogue setting up certain things, but I was happy with that. I didn't need another origin story of Superman, so I applaud this movie for the way it starts. Yay! For this adaptation of Superman, it draws heavy inspiration from the Silver Age of comics. This version of Superman is much lighter, much more comedic, and very, very comic booky. And if there's ever a superhero comic book character that can pull that off in a live-action film adaptation, I think it's Superman. Some of the biggest praise I can give this new Superman movie is, it sort of reminded me of a Superman movie that would have been made in the late 1990s. It even has that self-aware cheese factor to it, which once again I think works perfectly in this adaptation of Superman. And I do think the film captures the charm of those previous Christopher Reeves Superman movies, but it dials it up, it makes it way more bold and vivid, and it does feel like a literal comic book adaptation. But with all that said, I do hope when it comes to upcoming DC projects, they're not all the same tone and consistency of this film. I don't want to see this much slapstick comedy or humor in something like the new Batman movie, which I hope we get in a few years. I just don't want to see Bruce Wayne sit down on a whoopee cushion. That's all I'm saying. Throughout this movie, you don't see much of Clark Kent as the reporter. There are a few scenes that set it up, and I feel like that's all you really needed in this film. But even when Superman is donning the cape and the red underwear, you still get glimpses of Clark Kent's personality even when he's Superman. And he only really does the Superman persona when he's in the media spotlight, and I liked that. There's also a very touching scene where Superman goes back and visits his parents, and they're very salt-of-the-earth people, and I liked this adaptation of Superman's family. At one point, his mom comes into the room and says, "Cleaned your boots." But yeah, it was one of the most heartfelt scenes throughout the film, and one of the most necessary ones for me that made me connect with this adaptation of Superman. It made me realize I like David Corenswet as Superman. Now hear me out for a second. I will always love Henry Cavill as Superman, and I think it's one of the biggest crimes against humanity that we never got a solo Superman sequel of Man of Steel. I wish we would have, but when it comes to this new adaptation of Superman, I think David Corenswet's version of this works almost perfectly at times. He looks the part, and also he really embodies that this version of Superman isn't quite sure what he's doing. He's not a strategist. He's not great at everything. He's still figuring it out, and maybe he's slightly awkward at times. Yeah, his version of Superman has this innocence and warmth to him, which I like that take on this Superman. Also, another thing I do have to mention is, he does get his ass kicked a lot throughout this movie. Don't get me wrong, he's still punching kaijus in the face, using heat vision, and lifting up buildings, but this version isn't a strategist. He starts doing these things, but he doesn't really know how to resolve some of the issues, and that's where the Justice Gang comes into play at times. They have more of a strategy. They sort of know how to do the superhero thing a bit better than Superman, but he'll learn eventually because, hey, once again, he's sort of new to this. And I also think all that helps humanize him as this character. But yeah, throughout probably 85% of this movie, he's basically always getting his ass kicked. And at some point you go, I know you're not an expert at being a superhero yet, but you are Superman. Can you just like wipe off the dirt and get up there and kick some ass? Maybe that's my toxic male masculinity talking, but I just was hoping to see Superman be a bit more super than he was throughout the film. And yes, I did enjoy Crypto the CGI Superdog throughout this film, and every time he did something heroic up on the big screen, my entire theater clapped. So whenever you put CGI animals in a superhero movie, audiences love it. But overall, I did enjoy the dynamic of Superman having a dog in the film. It did add a little something to it, and once again, it humanizes the character, because who doesn't love a dog? What are you, a monster? Or maybe you're just Lex Luthor. He's not a man, he's an it. But first, very quickly, let's talk about Superman's romantic love interest, Lois Lane, played by Rachel Brosnahan in this film. And I liked her portrayal as Lois Lane. I thought she was mostly likable and she looks the part. And I did like what the movie did with her, because with every Superman movie, they always have to interject Lois Lane into the plot somehow, some way. And I thought what she did throughout this film was serviceable, and it did have some repercussions by the climax. Now let's talk about Superman's bald arch nemesis, Lex Luthor, played by Nicholas Hoult. And I'm just going to say this. I think this is my favorite live action adaptation of Lex Luthor I've ever seen up on the big screen. He's bitter, he's twisted, and he does have some very dark comedic humor at times, which I appreciated. But as a dude who is a genius, his plan has some gaping plot holes in it, and by the end of the film, I thought to myself, what was your plan? How did you think this was going to work, and what was the outcome supposed to be? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, like or hate this rendition of Lex Luthor, at least he's not popping Jolly Ranchers into people's mouths. And then you have the Justice Gang, which is an unofficial term, technically speaking, that consists of Guy Gardner's Green Lantern. You also have Hawk Girl, and then you have Mr. Terrific, who probably has the most screen time of any of the secondary superheroes throughout this film, or as the movie calls them, metahumans, which have existed for hundreds of years. And I surprisingly enjoyed what the movie did with this group of characters. And keep in mind, this is a James Gunn comic book movie, and this is right in his wheelhouse. He likes ensemble characters and crews in movies. And hey, I get it. I think having someone for Superman to talk to and relate to and sort of discuss this superhero thing with. But I really enjoyed Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner character in this film. And yes, there are some jokes relating to his shitty haircut. So the movie is at least self-aware. Now let's talk about the action and visuals. Now hear me out for a second. Going into this movie, I sort of knew exactly what I was going to get, and I heard all of the complaints on the internet. There are people who take clips from the trailer, freeze frame them, zoom into Superman's shoe, and there are a few issues going on. Yeah, I think Superman's wearing clown shoes at one point, but you don't notice it when you're watching the actual film. And I will say, the visuals throughout this are bold, they're fun, and it does look very comic booky at times, but it doesn't necessarily mean I loved everything. I think sometimes, visually speaking, some of the creative choices with the wide-angle lenses, I think it works. And there's a few other sequences throughout the film where I thought to myself, this isn't as visually stimulating as I was hoping it would be. There's also another fight sequence towards the end of the movie that sort of just takes place in a crack or a crevice in the ground, and it was sort of boring to look at. For a movie that's so bold and bright, I thought to myself, why are we doing this here? So at times I thought it looked fine, at other times it sort of did remind me of Matrix Reloaded, where everyone looks a little bit rubbery, like they don't have a skeleton inside of their body and they can just move however they want. But the other thing I need to mention when it comes to the action and visuals throughout this film is there's some fun action scenes, but it feels like they're so abrupt and quick. You do see Superman doing all the iconic Superman stuff, but there's not enough lead up and build up into it and enough suspense. And when it finally does hit that crescendo, it doesn't last long enough to get truly immersed into what you're watching. It's just so abrupt and so quick, and the camera zooms and pans, and then it's over. And I'm like, okay, I wanted some more of that, but I guess. And don't get me wrong, there is a ton of action throughout this film, but there's not a lot of memorable set pieces that really stood out to me. I just saw the movie a couple days ago, and before shooting this review, I was trying to think to myself, what is an iconic scene in this film like I just want to go back and revisit over and over again? and I really couldn't think of one. I'm just keeping it real with you. There's some cool stuff, but there's not one scene in this movie that just truly encapsulated my childhood needs, wants, and desires to see Superman kicking ass up on the big screen. I will say one of the coolest things in the movie was the Fortress of Solitude. I just wanted to see more of it. Now let's talk about what didn't work in this movie. Here's where things get messy as the plot of this movie and the screenplay. I appreciated the comedic tone throughout this film for the most part, and I think if any movie can have that comedic tone and get away with it, once again, it's a Superman movie like this. But I will say this. Sometimes they don't know when to stop. The movie's sort of like, no, don't care that much. Here's a joke. That way we don't have to take anything too serious. And for me, that's just a personal preference, but I was not a fan of the overuse of comedy in the movie. When it comes to previous James Gunn comic book movies, I feel like something like Guardians of the Galaxy got that comedic tone with that dramatic tone just right. For this, it's a little too comedic for its own good. So yeah, at times it definitely feels like a Saturday morning cartoon, and the little kid inside of me loved all of that. But at other times, I sort of want to see this multi-$100 million Superman movie and feel something when I'm watching it. One of my least favorite subplots throughout this film was one revolving around social media, and I get it. In this day and age, everything sort of does revolve around social media, like it or hate it, and when it comes to disinformation on social media, it's a real thing. People believe whatever they read when they scroll through a social media app. It's kind of scary when you think about it, but that is a plot point in this film. But I will say the way that they handled it just felt so tacked into the story and abrupt. And there is one character who is sort of Lex Luthor's side piece, and I didn't like the social media aspect revolving around her. She just takes selfies. I don't know. The character just, even for a movie that's over the top and comedic and light in tone, it felt too stupid for even this movie. There's also an entire subplot revolving around this fictional country called Boravia, and you see the trailers, so this isn't a spoiler, but ultimately, this entire subplot I found very boring, and it's very predictable where it's going, and it doesn't really offer much to the film, and ultimately, I feel like it didn't really matter. So if they would have just cut that out and replaced it with something else, I would have been completely fine with that. One other complaint I might have is with some of the supporting characters throughout this film, outside of Lex Luthor, Superman, Lois Lane, and maybe Mr. Terrific, but even that might be a reach. You don't really get to know much about anyone else in this film, and they feel very one-dimensional and almost like just background characters that exist. It would have been nice if some of these secondary supporting characters had a bit more humanity to them, rather than just feeling like one-dimensional cartoon characters at times. Now, here are my final flicking thoughts on Superman. I liked this movie, but I definitely did not love it. There's a lot of entertainment value in this film. This movie doesn't necessarily reinvent superhero movies, though I will say it truly embraces them and it's not afraid to go for it, which I can appreciate, especially once again when it comes to a Superman movie. But with all that said, the thing that this movie does get right, or at least for me it does, is it gave me a relatable, slightly different version of Superman that understands what it means to be human. And I think that is the most important aspect for a movie called Superman. You have the super, but you also need the man. And I think this film encapsulated that as well as it could have. So if the goal of this movie was to introduce a new version of Superman and make him relate to audiences, that way you care about new sequels or him in the DC universe, I think they achieved that for the most part. It did give me a new version of Superman that I'm interested in seeing in future installments. And because of that, I'm going to give the new Superman movie, that right there. It's definitely not the best comic book movie ever, but I did enjoy watching it in IMAX, and I would rewatch it again on a rainy day. So now here's my question for you, and let me know down below, if you've seen the new Superman movie, what did you think about it? Or who should be the next Superman villain that he goes up against? I don't know about you, but I would like to see a better version of Doomsday hit the big screen, just putting that out there. Yeah, this shit wasn't working for me. As always, thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe, that way we can talk about movies next time.